So in this video, I'll talk more about what actually happens when we go into this dualistic state of mind. But in order to do it so that it really makes sense, I have to give you a little bit of background. And I have actually given more background about this in a video that's called How the World Was Created. And if you really want to understand duality, you want to watch that video. But I'm going to give you a summary here. And I'm going to start out with this idea that only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion. Therefore, all differentiation is an illusion, and therefore all sense of self is an illusion. And this has led to this concept of no self or non-self. And the trickiness about this, I actually have a non-duality video to talk about the nonsense of non-self, which you also might want to watch. But the trickiness of this idea is that there is some validity to it, in the sense that there is a separate self that sees itself as a separate being. And that separate self is unreal, and as we walk the path towards a higher state of consciousness, a non-dual state of consciousness, we overcome that separate self. But it doesn't mean we can overcome all sense of self. Why? Because why do you exist? Why are you aware? Why can you watch this video? Why can you think about these concepts and ideas? Why can you even consider this idea of no self? Well, because you are a self. You are a self. You were created as a distinct individual self. But you were not created as a separate self. The separate self is something you have created. And the whole path to a higher state of consciousness is that you uncreate the separate self, or at least the beginning stage of the path. So let's look at this. In order to grasp this, you have to be willing to go beyond these non-dual teachers who are saying that only Brahman is real and all self is an illusion. There are some who will say infinite awareness, instead of saying Brahman, they say infinite awareness, manifested itself as you. And then infinite awareness forgot that it's infinite awareness. But by you studying non-dual teachings, infinite awareness in you can reawaken to the fact that it's infinite awareness, and then you supposedly completely disappear. You go back into infinite awareness, where there's no differentiation, therefore no self. Now, as I said in a previous video, you can just tune into your heart intuitively and see if there isn't some opposition in you to this idea that you are supposed to disappear. And that the highest outcome of your striving is non-existence. And if there isn't, then follow the non-dual teacher, see what I get you. But if there is, then let's go a little bit further. Okay, so what we need to recognize is, and we don't need to go into specifics here, I've done that in my video about how the world was created, but what we need to recognize here, there's a core of your being. A core of your being. That has awareness, and it has the ability to make choices. So what we can say is, there was a point in your past where that core of your being, I call it the conscious you, it's just a name, but there was a point where that conscious you came into existence on earth. For the first time, it descended into a physical body here on earth. Now, as I explained in several videos, this conscious you is an extension of your higher self, but let's not even go into that right now. Let's just simply say there's a core of your being that for the first time took embodiment on earth. And when you did this for the first time, you were at a certain level of consciousness. You had a certain sense of self. And that sense of self was that you were connected to something outside your own mind. And that something is your higher self. Let's not be specific about what it is now. Let's just say you were connected to something. So you had two options there in the beginning. You could expand your sense of connection. You didn't really have a clear sense of what you were connected to, but you had an intuitive sense you were connected to something. Which means, now be careful here, which means you had an intuitive sense that your mind could not fathom or define reality. But you were connected to something outside your own mind. And by expanding that connection, you could also expand your ability to understand, to fathom how life works. By getting to know more and more about how the real world actually works, the real world that is outside of your own mind, that isn't defined in your own mind. So that was the one option. You could build on your sense of connection, expand your sense of connection. The other option, because you have free will, is you could go below your starting point, go into a state of mind where instead of seeing yourself as a connected being, you see yourself, you experience yourself as a separate being. This is just the very basic here. There's a lot more to say about this, which I explained in the video about how the world was created. But the basic here is you have to say, you had to have a starting point, and you had two options: connected, separate. And you had the free will to choose either one. Now, why is it necessary to say this? Because it explains something that most non-dual teachers don't bother to explain, maybe because they haven't thought about it. But you see, here you have a non-dual teacher. He claims to have awakened from some kind of illusion that most people are in. And now he's teaching based on what he experienced. And why is he teaching? Isn't it because he wants other people to awaken from the illusion and stop suffering? Supposedly, right? Could be more self-centered motives, but this is what is normally portrayed out there. So, how are other people going to awaken? How is it possible that you can awaken? In other words, if you have gone into an illusion, once you are in that illusion, wouldn't it simply be a one-way street? You could never get out of it? We could also ask another way. If you are in a state of illusion that you can awaken from, it sounds like you were not always in that state of illusion. You were not created in a state of illusion. Because if you were created in a state of illusion, how would you have the potential to overcome the illusion? I'm just trying to jolt your mind into looking at this from a different perspective, because what my explanation does here is it defines the reason why you have the potential to awaken from the illusion is that you have self-awareness and free will. That's the core of your being. So you can come to be aware, oh, I'm in a state of illusion. I want to awaken. But how did you come to be in a state of illusion? Because you have self-awareness and free will. So you could choose what's it like to be in a state of separation. You could formulate in your mind this, what would it be like to be in a state of separation, see myself as a separate being? So what I'm trying to say is that we are created with this, a certain sense of self, and we have the ability to imagine different scenarios and to decide I'd like to experience what it's like. So you could say, I want to experience what it's like to be more connected than I am now. Or you could say, I want to experience what it's like to be disconnected, to be a separate being. What would that be like? Right? So then you could say, what enables you to have the experience that you are a separate being? And the answer is the duality consciousness. Now here's where there's again a subtlety that can require some contemplation. I know it took me years to really get this. I'm not saying it will take that long for you, hopefully. That's why I'm talking about it. So you see, what I said in the previous video is that in duality, there are always two opposite polarities. But when people have picked one polarity, they think their polarity is the truth and the other one is the lie. But in reality, both polarities are illusions. But this is just in duality. And what did I say about duality? It exists only in our minds. There is no duality in reality. So that means there is a real world outside of our own minds. It functions a certain way, it was designed a certain way, which we don't need to go into details here. But what we can say is, there is a reality that is independent of our minds. It is not changed by our beliefs, our opinions. That's why we have the option to see ourselves as connected beings. That's when we recognize there is a reality outside of my own mind. My mind does not define how the world works. I can learn, I can tune into, I can experience how the real world actually works. That's what you do when you see yourself as a connected being and you gradually expand your sense of connection. You're connecting to the real world outside your mind. This is not a dualistic polarity. This is just reality. This is how the world is, right? How do you go into separation? How do you separate yourself from reality? Well, you have to create the illusion that you are a separate being. And you do that by using the duality consciousness. But take care of something here. As I have said it from the beginning of these videos, only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion, the world is Brahman. The world is created out of Brahman. That's a reality. Everything in the world is, the glass and the juice are made of atoms. Everything comes from the one reality. But the illusion is that something can be separated from the one reality. But that illusion exists only in our minds. So what happens is, when you make the choice to go into the state of separation, seeing yourself as a separate being, you are creating an illusion. Now, there are some that will say, oh, this is completely wrong. This is sin. This is when humanity fell from grace. No, it's just a choice you have a right to make because you have self-awareness and free will. But take care of why you are having to make that choice, or why you are allowed to make that choice. Because you are allowed to have any experience you can imagine. Now, in my video about how the world is created, I explain this, but I'll give again a brief summary here. You can take two approaches to this. You can say, oh, nothing matters, there's no purpose for why we exist. Or you can say, yes, there is a purpose for why we exist. And the simplest purpose we can define is our growth in consciousness, our growth in self-awareness. So what we can say is that when we first came into being, as I said, we came into being with this very localized sense of self, a point-like sense of self. And the goal or the purpose of life is that we expand our sense of self, expand it more and more and more. We don't need to talk about yet at this point what we're expanding it into. We can just keep it simple. The goal is to expand our sense of self. How do we expand our sense of self? By having experiences. We have an experience, we react to that experience, and we gradually realize that we're actually co-creating our own experience and our own circumstances. And so it's by having these experiences with our environment, with other people, this and that, that we grow. And this means you can grow by seeing yourself as a connected being, but you can also grow by seeing yourself as a separate being. It's just another experience you can have. The only distinction we need to make is that when you see yourself as a connected being, you're connected to something real that exists independently of your own mind. When you go into separation, you go into a state of illusion that exists only in your mind and in the minds of other beings who have gone into separation. So I'm not saying that you have personally created all the illusions that you believe in, because other people have created them and there is a collective illusion on earth. Why that is, I explain how the world was created. I won't go into it here, because I want to keep focused on this duality. So, what I'm saying is, there isn't really anything wrong or sinful about going into separation. But the problem is that in order to have that experience that you are a separate being, in order to really have the experience, it must seem real to you that you are a separate being. So when you are a connected being, you are having experiences of a real world outside your mind that isn't defined by your mind. But when you go into separation, you're not having experiences of something real. Everything you experience in separation is an illusion. But in order for you to have the fullness of the experience, the illusion must seem real in your mind and in the minds of all other people who are in separation, which is the majority of humanity currently. So how can an illusion come to seem real? That's the central feature of the duality consciousness. And the central feature is this. Everything in duality can be defined in terms of this scale between two opposite polarities that are defined by a value judgment. One polarity is bad, one polarity is good. One polarity is the lie, this is the truth. This is unreal, this is real. And when you go into this state, you take one dualistic polarity, you elevate it to the status, this is good, this is real, this is true. The opposite is bad, evil, and a lie, and unreal. And it's not that you are believing this, it's that you're actually experiencing this. Duality is not an opinion. It's not like saying, I don't like ketchup, or I like sweet mustard. It's beyond that. It's deeper. It's an actual experience. And I'll talk more about that, how the experience comes about. But what I want to keep focused on here is this. You are allowed to have the experience that you are a separate being. But in order to have the experience, it must seem real. And it seems real because you are taking one dualistic polarity, elevating that to the status of being absolute, even though, as I said, it is relative. It's defined only in relation to its opposite. but you are defining that this is the ultimate, the real, and the opposite is the ultimately unreal. And as long as you don't question that illusion, it seems real to you, for example, that Christianity is the only true religion, or that capitalism is the only true economic system. And let's try and explain how this comes about. So, you know, they have these mazes, labyrinths. It can be hedges, for example, that are cut, or it can be walls that are built. So you go into this, and you are walking around in there, and you can actually get lost in there and not know how to find your way out. And this is an illustration of duality, the duality consciousness, right? So let's say you're standing right at the entrance to this maze. This is what I earlier talked about. This is the prison, right? So it's another way to illustrate the prison. So you decide you're going to go into duality. And in order to do this, you're picking one dualistic extreme, right? So let's just, in order to illustrate this, let's just say you're looking at Earth and you're seeing that there is a struggle between two groups of people. One group believes in one religion, the other believes in another. So you're deciding, I want to join that group of people, and I'm going to accept that they have the only true religion. So you're making a decision there, right? You're making a decision. I believe this polarity is the ultimate. You don't see it as a dualistic polarity. You see, this is the truth. That means you have now stepped into the maze. What happens, though, is that your belief in this truth is going to be challenged by reality, by the fact that other people believe the opposite. So in order to defend your choice, defend your truth against the challenge, you make another decision. And that decision takes you deeper into the maze. And then you are challenged again, and you choose another direction, takes you even deeper. So what has happened is that you have gone deeper and deeper into this maze, become more and more lost in it. And each of these decisions that you made, they form what we can call a perception filter. It's like, I've used this example many times, you put on colored glasses. If I put on yellow glasses and go outside on a clear day, the sky appears to be green. I'm seeing the sky as green through the glasses. But if I put on red glasses on top of the yellow glasses, well, I don't even know what that looks like, but obviously that's going to change the color of the sky again. So the more glasses I put on, the more it changes the actual experience I'm having. I mean, the sky is still blue, but I'm having so many glasses on that I see a whole different color. Probably it becomes brown in the end, but anyway. So what I'm saying is that when you have gone as deeply into the maze as you can go, you are experiencing yourself as a separate being. And the experience seems absolutely real to you. But there's an even deeper experience you're having which you are not aware of. Because what did I say is the difference between the two states of mind, connected or separate. When you're connected, you're connecting to a reality outside your own mind that is not defined by your own mind. When you go into separation, you lose that connection. And now what you experience is, everything you experience is an illusion that is created either in your mind or in the minds of other beings in separation. It's all illusion. Now take care here. There's again a subtlety. There's a glass with liquid in it. This is not an illusion. That's not the illusion I'm talking about. I'm talking about the illusion based on a value judgment. where if I was to be silly, I could say, well, the glass is good because it's solid, but the liquid is bad because it could spill. That would, of course, be stupid. But that's what we have, these value judgments superimposed upon everything. Capitalism is good, communism is bad, Christianity is the only true religion, Islam is of the devil. All of these value judgments, these are the illusions that we create in duality. And what does that do? What is the overall illusion created by duality? It is this. My mind can define what is real and unreal. Think about that. That's the illusion you have when you're in duality. You think your mind can define how the world should work and how the world is actually working. And again, this is an experience you are allowed to have in order to explore what you can do with your self-awareness and free will. The problem is, of course, that number one, your illusion will always be challenged. Number two, the challenge of your illusion will cause you to suffer, because you're constantly having to defend your illusion against the challenge, which is inevitable. The challenge is inevitable. You can't get away from it. So what has happened to many people is that over time, and I'm talking about lifetimes, because unless you accept reincarnation, you can't really understand how you've gotten so deeply into duality. This has happened over many lifetimes on this planet where the collective consciousness is dominated by duality and has been for thousands of years. So you've had many lifetimes over a long time span on this planet where life, as far back as we know, has been dominated by the dualistic state of mind. So you have gone deeper and deeper into the dualistic maze until there came a point where you had enough. And this can happen basically in two ways. It can happen because the suffering becomes so extreme that people can't handle it anymore. They say, this is enough. And they ask for some kind of help. Or it can happen because you begin to doubt your mind's ability to define reality. You're beginning to think, is this really real? Is it really, for example, is it real that only Christians will go to heaven? Because Jesus appeared 2,000 years ago. So does that mean that before 2,000 years ago, nobody went to heaven? In other words, God has a plan for saving people, but it started 2,000 years ago, even though the world has existed for longer. I'm just one silly example. But what I'm saying is that there could come that turning point where you are now deeply into the maze, but you are turning around. You are seeing, I don't want to go deeper into the maze. There must be a way out of this. And then you ask for help. And what happens is, when we ask for help, we receive help. Doesn't matter where it comes from. We don't need to define that now. But we receive help to see one particular dualistic illusion that we are dealing with right now. In other words, you are in a certain position in the maze. You got there by going around this corner. And in order to get out of the maze, you have to retrace your steps. So you first have to get back around that corner. And that requires you to see one dualistic illusion. And that you make progress. It's like I said, you are chained. And you unlock one lock, and you are free of that one chain. But you still have a lot of others. So what I'm saying is, going out of duality requires you to retrace the steps you took so that you consciously undo the illusions you came to accept in order to go deeper into duality. It's the only way it can be done. Why? Because what did I say was the purpose of existence? It says to expand our sense of self, and we expand this by having experiences. Now, when you're a connected being, every time you increase your connection, you're expanding your sense of self. But when you go into separation, you're not expanding your sense of self. Listen carefully. You go into the maze, you take on these dualistic illusions. you are actually limiting your sense of self. Because the more dualistic illusions you have, the fewer options you can see for how to react to situations. You see people, just as an example, the slightest thing that goes wrong, like somebody cuts them off in traffic, right? Really not that big of a deal, right? Maybe it will cost you 2 seconds, but is it going to make a difference that you get to work 2 seconds earlier or later? Doesn't really make much of a difference, does it? But the slightest irritation like that, and they immediately respond with anger. Yelling and screaming, giving people the finger, this and that. That's because people are so stressed by duality, they don't see any other option for reacting to a situation like that than anger. And that's what I'm saying. The deeper you go into duality, like I talked about, the sociopath, the narcissists, they have gone very deeply into duality, which means they don't see any other way to react than with force and violence. A dictator. Oh, somebody's opposing him. Chop his head off. What if he had a message that could benefit you? No, I know everything. My mind can define how the world works. You look at some of the dictators of history. They've actually believed that their minds could define how the universe works. Which means you have no options. You can only react the same way over and over and over again. And if you keep doing the same thing and expect different results, as Einstein said, you're insane. Because whatever you project in the universe, into the universe is going to come back to you. So what I'm saying is that when you go into duality, you are limiting your sense of self. But when you turn around and consciously undo a certain dualistic illusion, then you expand your sense of self. So that means that there isn't anything wrong with going into duality, because as you go out again, you're expanding your sense of self. But you only do it when you consciously see each illusion. And that's why this whole dream, that you can sidestep all of the illusions and immediately jump from wherever you are in the maze to the exit, is completely unrealistic. What would you learn from that? You are allowed to go into duality because it can help you grow, that you go out of it consciously. So if you just bypassed the whole thing, went into duality and went out again, you wouldn't learn anything. You wouldn't grow from it. And the whole purpose of life is growth. But of course, if you believe in what many non-dual teachers are saying, they are actually denying that life has a purpose. They are denying that there's a process of expanding your sense of self. They are saying, oh, your self was an accident. It shouldn't have happened. So you just need to awaken from the dream and disappear again. And again, if you believe that, you're beyond what I can help you. So just go on, see what that gets you. But if you're open to what I'm saying here, you need to, again, just tune into your own heart and sense that, don't you feel that life must have a purpose? It can't just be that all this exists for no purpose whatsoever. Does that make any sense to you? All the suffering you've gone through in this lifetime, many past lifetimes, was it just all for nothing? Because the whole purpose is that you awaken and disappear. You do understand, right, that the whole idea of some of these non-dual teachers is that when you reawaken from the dream, you disappear. You understand that? This is the whole concept of non-self as they explain it. I'm not saying it's realistic, but this is what they're saying. When you are fully awakened, you will disappear, because in Brahman or in pure awareness or infinite awareness, there's no differentiation, meaning there's no you, there's no awareness, no consciousness, there's no experience. And as I've said in some of my non-duality videos, this is not based on experience, because you cannot be a you that is experiencing, and then the you awakens and goes into infinite awareness, and then it comes back and says, oh yeah, there's this great infinite awareness beyond the awareness I have now. No. If you disappear, you disappear. There's nothing left of you. But as I'm saying, this is not the purpose of life. The purpose of life is that you start with a localized sense of self. You have experiences in this world of form that was created out of the one mind for the purpose of giving us an environment that we can relate to. And as we have these experiences, we expand our sense of self, and that process can continue for a very long time until we go way beyond the level of consciousness that anyone has on earth. Anyway, so that was what I wanted to say for this talk, and we'll go on and talk more about this, the duality consciousness and how it colors our perception of everything.